Good evening. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Board of Education. The board has been in closed session this evening starting at 6 p.m. for the purpose of discussion of employment of employee, collective negotiations, and actual potential litigation. I will note before we do the roll call, Mrs. Davey had a family emergency. She will not be joining us this evening. Do you? Okay. Oh, yeah, we're not going to have her. Okay. Can I go ahead and call the roll? Mr. Collins?
Here.
Mrs. Deroni?
Here.
Ms. Hirsch?
Here.
Mr. Carlquist?
Here.
Mrs. Conroy?
Here.
And Peggy Astajic, I'm here. 6 board members present, none are absent. Please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We do not have any individuals who have signed up for public comment. I will say that throughout this budget evaluation process, we have received a tremendous amount of input. So, again, thank you to all those who either came and spoke or sent us emails or sent links to the district website. So we have 3 items under our superintendent's consent agenda. Our first item is the approval of the budget reductions and revenue enhancements. Dr. Krizik?
We've had 3 meetings where we've kind of outlined the information that was in the EPRT report. We've followed up on some questions that the board has had. So there is the only changes that have been made is there's the tiered fee structure to the interscholastic sports, with the changes reflecting the per student cost. So the actual tiered fee structure looks a little bit different than it was previously presented. That will be then, once approved, made available for parents. So that was probably the most substantive change. The other piece, as it relates to the implementation of the change in the middle school counselors, there was a question that was asked. We have one counselor that is retiring this year. One is going on leave. So this year there is not an actual reduction in notice given to any particular staff member. As far as implementation, Mrs. Chester, along with Dr. Sullivan, are working with the both the PE health staff to have the content of the guidance course implemented in the health curriculum because at 8th grade. And we will continue to have the guidance course offered at 6th and 7th grade for the year ahead as a short-term solution. The content is primarily related to social emotional standards, which are highly connected to the social studies curriculum. In looking at the endorsements of our guidance counselors, we will have to do some movement of the guidance counselors in order to ensure that a properly certified guidance counselor is actually delivering the course, because there is a grade given to that course. When we discovered all of the certification issues, 2 ways. One, as it related to a certification audit that we had conducted, as well as our recent compliance visit. And so that will be some of the implementation as it relates to guidance. I think those were the 2 substantive pieces of conversation that we had at the board table the last time. So those would be the substantive changes.
Thank you. Any board questions or comments on this? I guess I'm going to just make a brief comment on behalf of the board. Again, this process has been, I would say, very collaborative. It also has taken a tremendous amount of time and resources, both on individuals within the district, on community members and parents who have spent a lot of time trying to understand all this and to give feedback, either through the EPRT committees, people that provided feedback through other channels such as email, and coming and speaking here at the board meeting. So I think from all of that, although it's, we are making reductions and nobody likes to see us lose things, I think that these are very balanced and thoughtful, and I'm not sure that they could get much more constructive as far as meeting our goal of continuing to advance student achievement and meeting our fiduciary duty to stay within our resources and make sure that we don't get into a position of borrowing. So again, I'd like to thank Dr. Krizik and your administration. You brought this process forward to us. I would say overall it went very well. There was always bumps in the road, and we knew that going through the first time. I know it's time to look at this instead of look forward, but if I could just pause for a minute and say, you know, as far as the process would go, looking out into the future, when would you suggest the timing of something like this should start? Because that's something that we're going to continue to look at to manage our resources. So how do we look forward on this and start our process? We're going into our budgeting process, but as far as overall evaluation, from what we've learned from this EPIRB process, did we start at the right time? Did we engage the right groups? Is that a process that we'll be able to look at? How did it go? Mrs. Mass.
You know, I think that there was some adjustments as we went through it to give people a little extra time to get through it. On the whole, I think that for the most part, for the first time, the timeline was right. And I don't think maybe veering from that timeline in the future would probably be advisable. I think probably what will need to happen is, because there will be a group of new administrators here, and we'll have to get used to the process, that starting off in August again and re-educating everyone about it and going from there is not a bad idea. It should be easier. It really, the whole process of this, and obviously as you can see by the narratives that have come through, a lot of time was spent in just saying, what is PE? What is the business office? What is operations and maintenance? What is transportation? And bringing that forward. Well, they have all that data now. So now it's really more the measurements and how they're meeting their goals. And that's a little easier to deal with, I think. And so we'll get even more substantive conversations going with that. So I would say August again for, that's a little too early. August again for starting to lay out which programs need to be looked at, what we didn't look at this year, and what might be looked at next year, and what you would want to repeat because there weren't enough metrics there to really make a sound decision on that, and going on from there. I would say that that's a good. In future years, you may not need to start that early. And certainly it will depend on whether there's a point where you actually have extra funds and want to add some things on, and we hope that everybody will get to that point.
I think just to add on to some things Ms. Masterton said, one of the suggestions that has been made to us is in order to give more people the opportunity to make the best decisions about participating, to put a calendar of when the EBRD committees will be meeting. People were signing up for committees and they didn't know when they were going to be meeting. So at least putting a calendar structure out there that is more informed. We think we've learned that from the process. We now have our own exemplar reports that have been put in place. There were some incredibly well-written reports that really reflected everything about the EPIRB process. And so I think having our own templates in place helps further groups go forward as well. So I do think that the timeline is probably always going to be the same. Your budget cycle is always going to be the same. And I think groups have the opportunity to evaluate the impact of reductions and or additions. And so I agree with everything Ms. Masterton said. But there will be some tweaks, obviously, in the first implementation. But I do believe for the first implementation, I will just have to say all of the administrators who facilitated a process that they never participated in before and really trying to keep everybody focused did an extraordinary job. I think our outside consultant, Fred Fox, was incredibly helpful to the process in terms of guiding us through uncharted territory. And I do believe that what differentiated our process from Carpentersville and Batavia was the inclusion of community members and parents as part of the ranking process. So I do think it really reflected what some of our values here are in 205.
Mr. Collins.
We had hundreds of people involved in the EPIRB process, and I've heard dozens of very good suggestions verbally about how to make it better in the future. And everything we do in this district, I think we need to have in a spirit that we always do it better the next time around. do we have a process in place, or can we put a process in place to get feedback from the people that participated and gather all the suggestions of how we make it better next year? And especially how we make it more time efficient for people next year.
We haven't started the formal debriefing process and gathering that piece, but that is part of the full circle of part of the first year implementation. So we haven't outlined what that process will actually look like, but that is our intent, to try to get some feedback and to try to, while it's fresh for all of us and fresh for everybody, identify where we can make some improvements, also what was good and what worked, and what we need to take into consideration in future years.
When do you think we'll have that process in place? That debriefing?
Well, we have a cabinet meeting next Monday. We can begin to talk about that in cabinet, about what that process might look like, and go forward from there.
All right, great.
Ms. Hirsch.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring us up a level. This is not our official budget for next year. However, we have spent significant time and really focusing on what our investments are going to be. And as a board, our responsibility is to provide guidance and communicate the values of our community. And the most evident way that we communicate what it is that we value as a community is what we invest in. The portion of the budget that this whole discussion has been about represents almost $73 million of taxpayer, state, and federal money that we are investing in our students. And I think it's important to keep the large picture, the things that we are investing in, our core academics for students ranging from age 3 all the way through college and career readiness and moving on to transition if necessary. Our populations who need specialized services, including our bilingual, our special ed students, our gifted education, our extracurriculars, our physical fitness opportunities, including the athletics programs. We're investing in the arts, in world languages, in our music programs, both instructional as well as performing. We are investing in social and emotional supports to ensure that we're educating the whole child for the children that we have in our district. We, of course, are caring for our facilities and providing the infrastructure necessary in order to provide the education for the students that we are trying to serve. I think this is a testament to the things that we are investing in. And while it can be viewed as we're making reductions, we're doing budget cuts, what we're really trying to do is to do the best with the resources that we have. And in this case, we are making some reallocations so that we can improve the educational experience of all of our students. So I feel very good, although we've gotten down to very detailed conversations about specific items. I think overall, the value that we have gained in going through this process of reallocating resources is one that is a valid and a thoughtful process. And I applaud the members of the community that invested many, many hours, the members of our staff, our administrative team, our leaders who led these groups. This is a much more authentic process and a much more thoughtful process in deciding how we invest all of these resources.
Mrs. Conroy.
I would say that pretty much sums up the process and everything we've done. And also, I'd like to thank everyone who's involved. I just have one piece that I'd like to see implemented in the future, and it was a piece I saw along the way that I think would have maybe saved us a little bit of time. And I don't think it's something we could have realized until we saw the whole picture. And that piece is, I think when our committee give their reports, I think it would be really helpful if that could be some sort of a workshop discussion so that board members could hear that and ask questions at that point. And I think that would even lessen the work for our administrators, because it would be less time that you'd have to answer our secondary questions that could have been answered at that point. So I just think communication-wise, it would be real helpful.
Thank you. We will move on to our next superintendent's agenda item, the approval of the new staff positions for fiscal year 12. And am I going down the consent agenda?
Yes, you are.
So I guess what we have is superintendent's consent agenda, and I apologize for having board discussion on a consent agenda item. Nothing was removed. So are there any items that Mr. Collins?
To remove item C.
Thank you. May I have a motion? Ms. Hirsch.
I move that we approve the superintendent's consent agenda items A and B.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mrs. Deroni. For staff positions? Not on the consent agenda.
No, yeah, you can ask for discussion before you can take the vote.
Not on consent agenda.
Okay. Others?
So for staff positions, do I need to take a voice vote?
You should take a voice vote.
Okay. Seeing that Mrs. Walsh is not present to call the roll, I will do the roll call. Mrs. Deroni?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mr. Carlquist?
Yes.
Mrs. Conroy? Mr. Collins?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. With that, so we've approved items A and B from the superintendent's consent agenda. And again, my apologies for getting confused on the layout of the agenda. May I have a motion for item C? Ms. Hirsch?
I move that the Board of Education approve an intergovernmental agreement with the Village of Bensonville to extend the TIF 4 Grand Avenue redevelopment project area until tax year 2033.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Carlquist. Is there any board discussion? Mr. Collins?
The reason that I pulled it, this particular item out of the agenda is that Edward Dunn's partner in their transaction with the Village of Bensonville is a company called AMB Property Trust. My employer has a professional relationship with that company, and so therefore I'll be voting present.
Mrs. Deroni?
I'm still not happy with this. I am, I guess, not going to be able to support it in the end. I'm concerned that there will be no surplus in the year, 2022. I don't know why they won't just release that parcel at that point. So I'll be voting no.
Ms. Masterton?
Just to give you a little updated information, we did send the intergovernmental agreement to our attorneys who made some substantive changes in there. Within the changes, there was the understanding that, number one, if the legislators did not approve the TIF extension for whatever reason, then the intergovernmental agreement was null and void. Secondly, they also added some pretty strong language about the surplus, that the surplus would be distributed before any other use of the funds was done. So it was pretty clear in there that was, he put in very, very strong language in there, and they agreed with all of it. We sent it back to Bensonville. They agreed with all of it. So we feel fairly confident that we feel very confident that we will see that surplus distribution in there, and that it actually guarantees us with an income during that time that we might lose if they took it out and then redistricted it as a TIF again. And then we would lose that money from there. So that's why we felt that perhaps the surplus was the better way to do it, particularly with the stronger language in there.
I guess the one thing that between our two meetings that we've talked about this, nobody asked is, how many people are actually going to work in that building? Do you know that?
They had told us approximately 400 new jobs, right?
So that brings 400 jobs to Bensonville, 400 jobs to the border of Elmhurst, and potentially 400 people that may buy a house in this town.
Mr. Carl?
Yeah, I'd like to understand a little bit more the concern about, the risks or what our council advises, because as I went through the language in the contract, it is very different than any of the other intergovernmental agreements we have around TIFs. I have not supported TIF extensions in the past, but this one, again, specifically, as you described, Ms. Masterton, puts this as a priority, and it assures the distribution of, it's referred to as a surplus, whereas we have other TIF agreements that are contingent upon whether or not there is a surplus. If there isn't a surplus, we're generating tax revenues off of that parcel to begin with, because it's in our base. And in fact, a case could be made that it is in a school district's better interest to have the property, the agreement structured this way, because it's a way to flow revenues to the district, in essence, in excess of the tax cap. Our base grows is capitated by the Property Tax Extension Limitation Act, whereas surplus funds during this period of extension of the TIF would flow to us in a different form and be above and beyond. It would allow us to capture the incremental tax, the surplus, not have it be necessarily capped. And Ms. Masterson, correct me if I say anything that is incorrect or that you have a different understanding. So the fact that this agreement has pretty strong, I'll say, teeth in it in terms of flowing the revenues. Two, that it has financial upside to the district. There is no, I don't see a downside, and because typically the downside in, for example, what the city of Elmhurst extended to us in an intergovernmental agreement was dependent upon whether they realized surplus revenues to flow back to us, whether we'd see anything. And we know, in fact, that the EAV is higher than what the existing base is. So I'm looking for help in trying to understand what the exposures or risk would be, because I don't see it in this case. And in fact, what I see is upside in terms of revenue to the school district during that period of time, and I see upside in terms of economic benefit that could accrue in other ways for Elmhurst and 205.
The one thing that our attorney did say is he didn't see any problem with it. In fact, and he knows very well our concerns about, he's been with us for all these years with, all of them. He understands the district's concerns about TIFs, and wanted to add that strengthening language in there because he does understand our concerns about TIFs. But he really did feel that it was very fair all the way around. The other thing is there's a piece of land sitting there that's, within our district that is got an EAV of $27,000 and is not ever going to be anything more without some kind of, additional help in order to make something of it in there. So,
on my point too, which is if that again, we can debate whether or not that property that the village is working to try to do the further development, whether or not that requires the extension or not. We've been told that it does, but regardless, I think the piece that we're talking about is whether or not to release or to have this agreement in the intergovernmental agreement on the existing developed piece of property, which is where the hotel is. And again, I think there is a case to be made that says if the property next to it develops, then the EAV of the developed property will appreciate much more rapidly, and whether it's in the form of a surplus or when it comes time to be released, will be worth a lot more to the district during this period of time as well, versus carving it off, letting the TIF expire, and still having a vacant property next to it. So I really would be interested in exploring if anyone has any additional, they see concerns or risks with this, but I think this looks like makes good economic sense.
Mrs. Conroy.
I agree. I think that every time we're faced with a TIF, we have to take it individually. And I think as board members, we take that seriously, and we really consider each one as an individual opportunity. This one in particular, especially with the additional language that our attorney has added, I think is going to be a win-win for us. And I think that we have a responsibility to not only the town of Bensonville, but also to Elmhurst to take an opportunity to build jobs, to build some economic development over there. And I think it's a really good thing to do.
Thank you. I'm also going to support this, and my reasons are very consistent, so I'm not going to repeat the points made at the board. But I think it makes a lot of sense for this property, for this town, for this district. So with that, Mr. Carlquist?
Just one more point I want to make clarification, at least from my perspective on this. I don't view our job or our role is to worry about or be concerned about economic development and bringing jobs. I think those are all nice things. I think what we need to be concerned about is protecting the financial interest of this district. And for that reason alone, I think this motion is worth supporting. I just want to be clear about my position in supporting it.
Thank you. Mr. Collins.
I agree with Mr. Carlquist, but the reason I brought up the jobs is because, as I think one of our speakers at public comment in a previous meeting mentioned, there are many vacant homes in the northern part of Elmhurst. So jobs in close proximity within District 205's boundaries also, the people that hold those jobs are inclined to buy a house nearby and may buy some of those vacant homes. And that is good for our community and our district.
Mrs. Conroy.
I agree with Mr. Collins, and I think that was what the point that we both made was that it basically benefits the district, it benefits the money that the revenues that we can eventually get for our schools.
We'll do a roll call. I will, my scientific method, we will start with Ms. Hirsch.
Yes.
Mr. Carlquist.
Yes.
Mrs. Conroy. Yes. I'm a yes. Mr. Collins.
Present.
Mrs. Deroni.
No.
Okay, so if I'm doing my math right, we have 5 ayes, 1 present, and 1 absent. That motion carries. It's 4 ayes. I'm sorry. You wouldn't know I'm an accountant. Okay, no calculator here. All right. That covers our agenda items. We just have announcements of upcoming meetings. Our next meeting is Tuesday, March 22nd, a Board of Education business meeting, 7:30 here at the District's 205 Center. Following that, April 12th, and that's a workshop meeting. And then April 26th, we have a Board of Education business meeting again. Are there any other, I'll just make note that we will be returning to closed session for additional discussion. There will be no actions coming out of closed session. Are there any board communications? Ms. Hirsch?
I move that the board return to closed session for the purposes of employment of employee.
Moved by Ms. Hirsch, seconded by Mrs. Conroy. We'll take a voice vote. Mr. Carlquist? Mrs. Conroy? Yes. I'm a yes. Mr. Collins? Yes. Mrs. Deroni?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We will be adjourning to closed session. And again, no action items will be coming out of that conversation.